Bowl season is almost upon us, and Penn State plays January 1st, so we're doing a little bit of previewing, looking at Penn State as they get ready for the Outback Bowl. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. James Franklin said last Sunday that what he is looking for in this particular time from his team is to do some development of some of their younger players. So Nate Bauer has taken that and run with it, and the most important players on offense and defense to get those developmental reps during bowl season. It's the golden pot at the end of the rainbow for coaches that get to bowl games. So we're going to get into the players that Nate thinks are the important ones that develop this season. He's narrowed the list down to 3, and he's here to share that with us today. Nate, long introduction, but welcome. Thank you for coming to the show.
It was great. I appreciate it. How are you?
I'm good. I hate long introductions. I try really hard to make sure that people actually hear your voice and not just look at you going, well, I blather on for a little bit. So glad you're on the show. Glad we're doing the follow-up to the offense.
Nate Bauer had a 3.14 GPA at Penn State, coming to you after 17 years of professional experience. Go with it, man. It's good. I like it.
So how did this work out for you today? The article up at bluewhiteillustrated.com.
So, I mean, look, let's be honest here. I can't choose incorrectly, right? I mean, if I'm limiting myself to 3 choices on a side of the field, well, really, I did it for offense and for defense. Look, like it's important for all of these guys. That's the bottom line.
There's about 5 corners we could name of guys that need to step up next year.
100%. Same for receivers, right? Like, so if you're looking across the field, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, it's really just about seeing the positions that have needs for next season. And obviously we're still working with a situation where you don't know exactly who is coming back and who isn't, but you can make some assumptions, certainly at this point.
Yep. What are the assumptions you made, not to cut you off, what are the assumptions you made as far as guys that are moving on in your article?
So the first one is certainly Ellis Brooks, having already been at Penn State for 5 years, that he will move on. There's been some smoke to that effect as it is. And on top of that, Jesse Luketa, right? So even if Jesse Luketa were to somehow come back for another year, it really wouldn't make a difference at Mike linebacker, you would assume, right? But again, like I'm making that assumption that Jesse Luketa will also move on. So primary spot number 1 is really the quarterback of your defense at that Mike linebacker spot. So he was number 1, and I went with Tyler Elsdon then as a result. And I think that we can both kind of speak to the fact that that's an important position. That's a guy who Penn State has had some optimism about, I would say. If you go back and kind of collect some of the quotes and some of the impressions that Penn State's coaching staff, whether it was James Franklin, whether it was Brent Pry, Dwight Galt, like all of these guys have really kind of touched on the fact that Tyler Elsdon is a guy who they have high expectations and high aspirations for, which makes him a perfect candidate for this, right? Because this season, he really hasn't played a whole lot. It hasn't played a whole lot. It goes back to
the whole thing of they didn't really blow anybody out, so guys like Tyler Elsdon didn't get into a lot of games.
Correct.
Yeah. So you can put my name on the list, by the way, of people that are expecting big things out of Tyler Elsdon. I was very impressed with his film in high school, and I'm expecting those steps to be taken that James Franklin talked about in spring.
But it's funny, right? He was a guy who, if I'm recalling correctly, and maybe I'm not, but you had some questions about his preparedness this season. And in the very limited film that you were able to see, I think he played Ball State, Villanova, and Indiana. I think if you can refresh my memory here,
he wasn't good in coverage, so that was the problem. And that was his profile in high school. He is a human missile. He's going to fill gaps. He's going to get downhill, but can he turn and run? He was kind of a stiff-necked bull sort of player that doesn't move well in space. He looked better in the spring. I did see an improvement there, but, that's spring ball. So then when you watched him against Ball State, if you looked at some of his PFF grades this year, he got thrown on in that game, and he didn't look comfortable in space. So that's the development that he has to take going forward, because he's got a lot of good skills as far as he's a twitchy, fast, explosive football player that now just needs to transition that explosiveness to every direction of the football field, or at least as many as he can.
And isn't a big part of that knowing what to do?
Yeah.
Right. Like the longer that you're in it and the more comfort that you feel at the position, those things are going to come more naturally. I mean, but like you said, with the twitchiness, he's got the physical tools. He's got the ability to do these things. It's just a matter of putting it all together, which is, again, I don't want to be the there's nothing magical to this like insight.
Yeah,
that's why these weeks are important. That's why December, January, February, March, April, they become critically important for a player like that who very conceivably could step into a starting role next season.
And it's about knowing the position and eliminating inefficiencies as much too. So even if you aren't the best athlete in the world, one of the things at linebacker in particular is don't have false steps. So don't take 2 or 3 extra steps downhill for your run fit on an RPO. Read it, react, flow to the football correctly. And that's where Ellis Brooks has been very good early, and then a little, hiatus there in 2020, and then much better this year of being just phenomenal at getting there. That's the thing that I think he has to replace, and he'll do it differently, where Ellis Brooks is much more of a fluid athlete, doesn't have that pop behind his pads as much. Ellis Brooks can see it and fly downhill and hurt some people, and that's going to be kind of his. I think that's going to be his Mike linebacker role, is much more of that traditional sort of thumper guy, and he just can't be bad in coverage. I'm not expecting him to be, what Brandon Smith has been this year, some of the other guys that have been good in coverage, going back to Sean Lee and players like that at that position. I think he just has to not be a liability. The other guy I want to bring up, because I think based on his physical tools and that he had a good season, I wouldn't say it was an elite season, but Brandon Smith most likely is moving on. Penn State was looking at Jacoby Windman in the transfer portal, who chose Michigan State. So they're clearly looking for a guy with Sam position flexibility. Do you think Kobe King fits into this picture as a guy where early in his career, Lucetta and Ellis Brooks were both splitting time at that Mike linebacker position? Do you think there could be a situation like that where there's the co-starter going into next year?
Right. Well, and for sure. And you're talking about box linebackers, right? So they conceive of that Mike and Will to be relatively interchangeable, I think. Is that your read on their take on those positions?
Yes. So it's those two, and then the Sam position is very different. So there's some interchangeability, but you still got to cover the slot if you're the Will linebacker. So if they're going to be if the offense is going to be in a 3-by-2 set, or if they flex the the running back out, somebody's got to leave the box, and that's typically the Will. And that's kind of where you've got more coverage responsibilities, the Will, than the Mike.
So my question for you would be, and I hate to put you on the spot here, but is Kobe more of a Mike or a Will versus what we just talked about with Tyler? Like between the two of those, who do you see filling those roles?
See, I think they're so similar in the end result. So Kobe is very,
because Kobe's big.
Yes,
like, he's a big dude. Like
yes,
visually, I mean, we've both seen him kind of up close. I mean, he just massive.
and he's been that way since he was a senior in high school. So he's a big dude that didn't get big. He's a big dude that's been big. So he knows how to handle his size. He's got, I think he's a little more like Ellis Brooks with fluidity. He's a very fluid athlete that when I watched him on film, my concern was, does he have the speed? Like, if you could smush him and Elsdon together, you would have an all Big Ten linebacker from a physical standpoint. But it's just, which one do you think fits what you're looking for? Because Elsdon, I think, has a little more speed, and they're both, I wouldn't say, none of them are at the level of Brandon Smith or Curtis Jacobs. So then your question becomes, do you split those guys at the Mike linebacker position, move Curtis Jacobs over to the Will, and then find a new Sam linebacker who, as much as I consider that a starter on the defense, you do go to 5 defensive backs quite a bit with Daquan Hardy, who I also consider a starter on the defense. So you can massage that a little bit more, and maybe Jamari Budden comes into play, which is why I thought Windman was really important for Penn State, because he had that flexibility to play either position. But that one's obviously to the wind now. They're not going to be able to get him. So I think it leaves Penn State in a really precarious position where they might have 3 box linebackers and might not have a good replacement at that Sam position. Or you might have to have somebody that's not a great will.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, I look, like that's what this time of year is for, is figuring those things out. And certainly given the date right now, right, in early December, there's lots of time. So much of that transfer portal movement is going to happen after the new year.
Yep.
And so I think there are probably some players who have not had those year-end conversations and figured out what's going on with their head coach and their position coach, right? Like just so much of this is in flux right now that it's really difficult to say one way or the other as to right, like the prospect that you're just talking about, Windman. If you miss on that, there's no guarantee that, one, there will be another that you love quite as much.
Right.
But 2, that there won't be.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, there very well could be somebody else out there who comes out there who isn't currently there.
And I came up with the Litton-Ebiketie scale of transfer that I was thinking of Jacoby Windman. So A.J. Litton is a guy that immensely talented, but played primarily on special teams. Was a participant in the team and was not like he was on the bench or wasn't valuable to the team, but he wasn't the impact guy that Arnold Ebiketie was, who became the star of the defense outside of Jaquan Brisker. Yep. On the Litton-Ebiketie scale, I think Windman would have been a solid Tangelo. So he would have been a guy that you could play at a position. He's a starter. He's not the star, but he was going to be a good and, again, versatile piece in this puzzle. So that's where, you look at what they have on the roster right now. It might be redshirt freshman Jamari Budden that has to fill in that role of Sam linebacker like Curtis Jacobs did earlier in his career. If that's the case, it doesn't feel ideal to me, does it, Nate?
I would say not, other than the fact that Budden's another guy who Penn State has felt good about, right? I mean, he's a guy who they talked about and through the course of the season, right? Like, this year was so much better of a circumstance for them to develop guys through practices, right? Whether it's developmental scrimmages on Sunday, just the practice situation that they had this year, certainly as compared to last, but just in general, this was a team that had so many true freshmen, redshirt sophomores who really just weren't in a position to play this year, who just didn't see a ton of time, other than guys who obviously had started or moved into those critical roles. So I think the fact that as the season went along, you started to hear about some of those guys more and more, even if they did preserve their red shirts. It still is a situation where Penn State can probably feel a little bit better about whether or not they're ready to play next year. Now, again, like, that's not to project starter status on some of these guys, but
and I guess that's the part where it's, if you've got a guy that's going to be on the field as a redshirt freshman for 700 snaps by the end of the season, that might make you uncomfortable. And you're right, Budden was another guy that had, I think, a really underrated profile coming out of high school. So that's not to discredit that, but as to the point you made, we haven't seen him this year. So much less evidence of that, where we at least got to see Kobe King a little bit, and he was more of a star in what we saw from spring practice as well. So I feel a little bit more sure of what I've seen from Kobe King as far as instead of what we've seen from Jamari Budden. But in any case, I think you're going to see both of those guys, Elsdon and King, at the very least, part of the linebacking core next season. What's the next guy on your list?
So I went to defensive tackle.
Is it who I think it is?
I hope so. Jordan Vandenberg. Excuse me.
Yes, Jordan Vandenberg is my guy.
Can I call him the little engine that could? Is that?
He's another dude that I don't think you realize how big he is. He's a thick kid, and like in a way that you don't notice at first, and then you realize he's like a big linebacker. because he has the proportions of a linebacker. He's not a big kind of meaty defensive tackle, but he's 285, 290 pounds, and he moves
and he's fast.
Fast, yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, there were a couple of plays this year. Off the top of my head, they're not coming to me. Maybe Michigan State was one, but he had a couple of plays where, like, you saw, and obviously we're talking about guys who had very, very limited participation this season.
Yeah.
But even in those instances, you could see some of the flash. Like, you could see some of the elements that Penn State got excited about and bringing these guys onto Penn State's campus. So, no, I mean, he was a guy who, again, a little bit older, right? Didn't come to Penn State as a true freshman. They got him after a year at a community college, and
Iowa Western Community College, right? I think
Iowa Western, right? Like,
I screwed it up about 9 times, 5 of them intentionally because I couldn't remember it.
Okay. What were your impressions when you first saw him in the first place?
Well, he played defensive end at Iowa Western, so it was. Penn State, what they want from their 3 technique is basically to be a 5 technique defensive end that is just unblockable, strong, and quick. And he fits all of those molds. And actually, I heard from him, I believe it was him, he commented on one of my previous YouTube videos before I was here on Blue White Illustrated, saying that he had, I think, a knee injury during the season that he played through. And so he was lacking some of the power in his lower body, because one of my assessments of him was he's quick, he's got violent upper body strength, but he needs to work on his lower body strength at Penn State so that he can become that complete 3 technique. And he said, yeah, I was playing with a knee injury, and that's actually one of my strengths. And watching him in practice, because I wanted to see him through the course of the season, I was very interested in his abilities, and his movement skills are off the charts. So then it just has to become... he's a 3 technique. He's played some there before. Has he learned the position? Does he know how to take on blocks from multiple angles and all that stuff?
The thing about him that kind of stood out to me from this season is I had an interview with Dwight Galt in August where I was able to talk about some of the guys that stand out in the weight room. And towards the end of the conversation and the end of the interview, one of the things that I asked was about the true freshmen or younger guys who are new to the program who have impressed. And he had 3, right? You can guess where this is going, obviously, but Landon Tengwall was one. Jamari Button was another one, a guy who just physically is impressive. And then Vandenberg was the 3rd. And the reason for that was, he just is an ox, right? Like,
I think that's a great way to put that. Yeah.
He just had all of those elements where, look, like, I wasn't asking for surprises, right? Like, I wasn't saying like, oh, who's somebody who you didn't expect to have those elements. It was just who impresses you in the first place of those groups of newcomers. And to be among those 3 that stand out the most at that kind of early stage in their Penn State careers, I think speaks volumes, because in a lot of those cases, right, like, some of these
he also
guys
got here in the summer. Like, he got here in August, so it wasn't like he was an early enrollee or anything. He stood out immediately.
Some of these guys they just kind of are who they are physically, right? Like, you do the best that you can. But when you're working with that type of a ceiling in terms of athleticism and some of the different things that they can do, when you add the development side to it in terms of technique and, all of the different things that John Scott has been working with him on this year, that raises the bar a little bit. I think that certainly you can also see the fact that that's a position this year. I don't see how it could have been demonstrated any more clearly with Tangelo, obviously having to step in Mustafer's absence, but he's going to be gone, right? Tangelo's going to be gone. And then you don't know what's up with Mustafer yet. There's going to be opportunity there. There's going to be a place for those guys.
Just so everyone is aware, because I don't know if everyone knows Jordan Vandenberg because he was added so late in the class of 2021, 6'3", 292. So he's not a small guy. He's 6'3", 292 pounds. And I don't want to say it's like natural weight, but it doesn't look like he's tried too hard to add weight. Another thing that, and I had this picture up a second ago. I want to put this up again. One thing that's really important to me is bend from defensive linemen, like lowering your pad level. And he is a very natural bender. Some guys you get that are big and strong and they get a little muscle bound. He has a natural fluidity to him. So yeah, when you brought him up, I was like, oh, we're going to have a long conversation about physical tools because this guy's off the chart. I'm super excited to watch him play football.
It's just kind of funny bringing him up because I'm not sure how many Penn State fans are really aware of him other than, the diehards.
Yeah.
He wasn't like a celebrated class of 2021 member, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he just, I don't know. His story to me flies a little bit under the radar, but again, if you're paying attention to some of the things that Penn State's coaches have said, Brent Pry brought him up in the preseason, in June, really, where Brent Pry said that he thought that he was positioned to push those guys at defensive tackle, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, that is what you want, is a guy who's going to drive starters forward to keep everybody moving, and with a work ethic and kind of that attitude and that element that he brings to the game. Yeah, it appears that he is ready to fulfill that.
I was also glad that they didn't play him this year because one of the things that I was concerned about is he played in the spring. So he played his community college season in the spring into the late spring, almost into like end of May maybe. So playing 2 football seasons in 1 year seemed a little ridiculous. So I'm glad that they were able to keep him redshirted and that he didn't have to contribute this year, because that sort of load to me seemed like you could cause more harm than good to his body physically, and you want this guy next year to step in and be an ox. That nose tackle position, though, that's an interesting one. Where do you think Penn State goes there? Because you got Keziah Izzard, also 3 technique. Devon Ellies kind of has a squatty sort of hybrid body type. Is there anyone that you're looking at opposite them to have that big, thick PJ Mustipher? Or is it Mustipher? Are you thinking it might be him coming back?
I think it might be him coming back, right? Like, the fact that James Franklin, right after the injury, talked about it a little bit as a possibility that they didn't expect, right?
Yeah.
For him to come back. And then PJ obviously personally had an interview with the media late in the year. I think it was the week leading into the Michigan State game, at which point everybody expected him to say, oh, yeah, I'm coming back. He declined to do that at that point because, just kind of reading between the lines a little bit, it seems like Penn State as a program might have a little bit of a policy of like, hey, let's NFL decisions, coming back, transfers, whatever.
Let's get an infographic about it and put it out on Twitter. Let's make an official statement. Yeah.
I believe the kids call that an edit.
Oh, is that what that's called? An edit? Yeah.
Yeah.
The technical term is an infographic, but yeah. No one cares. No one cares, technical guy.
You're ruining it.
I'm sorry. I make them for the show every day. I didn't make any for today, but I make them every day.
You want to make PJ Mustipher?
No, I don't. Well, no, I don't have the skills of the guys over at the Lash Building that do that. Somebody asked me that one time because I'm making stuff for the show, and they're like, "Yeah, there's this graphic design job that's open." I'm like, I didn't go to school for that. I'm doing what I learned on YouTube and from a lifetime of having Photoshop.
Props to those guys. Anyway, yes.
Your last guy on the list.
Last guy on the list was Jalen Reed at safety, and because again, Kalen King was kind of the standout star, right, of that true freshman class. He made a huge splash in the spring, and everybody was just that those were the high expectations. And I think you ended up seeing in his game reps this year that he played a decent amount.
Yep.
But I think because of that, a little bit of what some of these other guys brought to the field was overshadowed, particularly in that defensive secondary. And definitely Jalen Reed was among the other highlights. And the fact that James Franklin said, and I think it was early November, his name got brought up because he had already played in 4 games. And so, whether that was not by necessity or opportunity, right? Because he was just that good, was kind of an unknown at that time. And Franklin made it very clear, right? Like Franklin was just like, no, he's a guy who we're pulling the trigger on just because he's out there. He talked specifically, you see this picture specifically about that Ohio State game and how ready he was for the moment that you can, it's a lot of these intangible things you don't really know until you're in the moment and you're in the environment. And that was Franklin's main takeaway was, here's a kid who is ready for this. He's not overwhelmed by the moment. He's not overwhelmed by the situation. And he was able to go out and produce, right? I mean, it's not like he racked up stats by any means, but he's a guy who got double-digit rep counts for the rest of the season.
Well,
and
he had his own
in
package.
7 games.
So he had his own third down package, and that is its own sign of respect when it's not just that you come on spelling somebody else. He came on with a specific intent in mind, meaning the defense is scheming to his talent. And that, to me, is something that I'm looking at. Obviously, new defense coordinator and all those things, but with Anthony Poindexter coming back, the safeties coach, that kind of feels like a prelude of things that might happen next year. That safety position, though, I think is really interesting with Enzo Jennings and Tyler Rudolph going into the transfer portal. It's wide open to me. We got to. I'm assuming at this point that J.R. Brown is coming back. Is that a fair assumption?
That's my assumption.
Okay, and I think that makes sense for him. So you've got J.R. Brown, and then who's? I'm struggling for somebody else. Keaton Ellis, Jalen Reed. They want to play. They want to play 4 safeties. So who's going to be? Or is it just going to be a 3 deep rotation and Jalen Reed is going to be that guy?
They want to play 5 safeties. They want to have. They like their ideal is to have 2.5 deep, really, at all of those positions on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Will they have that opportunity? I'm not sure about this upcoming season, but I think Keaton's an interesting guy to me who I think we need to learn more about.
I don't know what his home is, though. The more I watch him, I don't know where he fits as a football player because it's a bit of Lamont Wade, where he's a phenomenal tackler. Zone coverage coming downhill is great, but as a converted corner, you'd expect him to be a little bit better in man coverage, and I think that's where he struggled. And that's why he got moved from corner. So that field safety, if he splits time there with Jair Brown, I don't know. I just don't know how that fits in it. I think that's a concerning thing for him. And he's a guy that is smart and works hard and has physical skills. It just, the light has not come on for him as a football player yet, in my opinion.
Year 1 to year 2 could change things, right? I mean, I certainly, obviously that's the intention when you make a position change like that. And the fact that they were committed to it, right? Like after having made that decision and there being maybe some opportunity at corner, even with as talented as that corner group was, there were still some occasions this season where it may have made sense to shift him back and forth, right? To let him do a little bit both of those things, right? He stayed there. And so the fact that he missed early in the season, I don't think helped at all.
Yeah.
There was some conversation during preseason camp that he was positioning himself to compete, if not win that job with Jair Brown. So look, I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility to think that he could be a starter next season, but certainly this year, I don't think that there's really any debate about it. Did not pan out probably the way that he would have anticipated or would have hoped for.
Yeah. And that group in general, I think you have to add another body. I don't know if...
Well, that's what Wheatley is, right? I mean, that's Zakee Wheatley is going to be in there.
That was going to be my next question: is who's the next corner that moves over? Who's the next guy? Zakee Wheatley was interesting because yes, he's got a safety body, but so does Joey Porter Jr. I didn't know if they wanted to go long corners and they wanted to start that trend because Wheatley, I mean, we've seen him run. He's a phenomenal athlete. So that's what you're thinking is he's going to move over to safety and be that next kind of hybrid role.
Not sure. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And,
Somebody's moving, so that's somebody always moves every year, and he's the guy that makes sense, right?
Maybe, yeah. No, I mean, look, I just think that they will. I mean, first of all, you're gonna have a new defensive coordinator, right?
Yep. Yep.
So there's gonna be a new puppet master behind all of this that is gonna have to be figured out, and certainly whoever that is gonna have some moves to make in one direction or another, whether it's through the transfer portal or in shifting guys and shifting some of the chess pieces on the board.
This is the BWI Daily Edition. Nate Bauer. We're discussing his article about 3 critical underclassmen that need to develop during bowl practice. We've run down the list. We started out with Tyler Elsdon, went to Jordan Vandenberg, defensive tackle, who joined the Nittany Lions late in the class of 2021, and Jalen Reed. It always ends up that we just end up talking about all of the positions, right?
Yeah,
so this is a positional breakdown.
From 3 to 12 in a matter of minutes. But
one of the ones we didn't touch on, though, was defensive end. And I'm curious as to how that position is going to work out, because Adisa Isaac, you're going to get him back next year, presumably. But what returns as far as that unit, it might be one of the ones that's up in the air as much as any to me.
Yeah, I think, look, I think that Adisa Isaac is a guy who, look, out of sight, out of mind a little bit. I think in the perceptions of maybe some Penn State fans and even some of the media, certainly me included, who you forget he was going to start this year. He was going to be a starter there at that position. So between him and Nick Tarburton, who you're going to presume is back, you have 2 starters at least to work with there. And then the depth behind that is Zariah Fisher has to come into play. He's a guy who saw, I think, I don't have the PFF in front of me, but his reps increased as the season kind of went along.
Yep. Can I stop you about Zariah Fisher? Just there's one thing that's kind of, he's always been so unique to me in this certain element. When he was recruited, the best thing he did was he found the ball in the air. He was amazing in coverage in high school. He also was like 6'5", 250 at the time in high school, playing middle linebacker. Quarterbacks literally couldn't throw over him. He blocked out the sun. But he doesn't do that at defensive end. So, I guess my evaluation, I haven't seen him play football. Is he the next Jesse Luketa? Is this going to be a trend for them? Tarburton and Zariah Fisher, all these linebackers that have transitioned to defensive end position. Are we doing that? Is that a thing we're going to see?
I think. I mean, right? Like, isn't that what it looks like to you? I mean, certainly I saw through the court. Now, there are a couple of games that stand out to me in particular where I noticed it, and I'm not sure that I could say the same as the season progressed, but Wisconsin was one where the defensive ends fairly consistently dropped into coverage.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, I think that is something that they want. They want kind of long, rangy guys who can get to the quarterback.
Yep.
Yes. But also, kind of drop into pass coverage and make plays in that department as well. So I don't know where run stopping, is prioritized on that list. Like, some of those guys physically, I think that you would probably project as being outmatched a little bit in that department.
Yeah. Well, Tarburton I thought was a good run defender, but I don't know I don't see a lot of guys that can rush the passer. Like in this, that's what I'm saying is like the skill set of the guys that we're talking about outside of Adisa Isaac, who is a pass rusher and was known as that going all the way back to his redshirt freshman season. You've got Tarburton, who's a run-stuffing, tenacious linebacker, plays with strength, doesn't have bendability to the edge. Zariah Fisher seems like a clone of that. Then you got guys like Devon Townley, who's a true freshman. I think that there's an open door for a guy like Dennis Sutton to come in and actually be in the 2 deep, because they need guys that can get to the quarterback. They don't have that right now.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. There is one more true freshman whose name I'm trying to find because it's escaping me right now. The kid from, wasn't it Indiana? Maybe
Rodney McGraw.
Rodney McGraw.
Yeah. There's a reason I didn't bring his name up because it's the same. Like, he's got the same body type, a big, strong, thick kid that I didn't see a lot of bendability there. Everything I said about Jordan Vandenberg and his ability to bend and to have natural ability to get to the quarterback, I think they got a lot of strong side defensive ends. I don't see a lot of guys that have the Ebiketie build to get to the quarterback. And we saw this year when Ebiketie was neutralized by the snow or double teams or a good tackle. I don't know why Jesse Luketa is declaring for the NFL draft, because with his physical skills, if he came back for another year and learned how to rush the passer, he could be a borderline day one pick with the speed. And if he got bigger, I'm always one to be more cautious about that, because if you get lost in the middle rounds of the draft and you're trying to work on yourself in the NFL, they don't care. Like, it's a numbers game for them. So if you work or you don't, and if you're at Penn State where you can get individual skill teaching and development and work on your pass rushing, I guess it's a conservative, safer environment than throwing it to the wind and saying I'm going to go to the NFL. But I don't have to make any of these decisions. I get to just say, well, this is what I think.
Did we talk about Smith Vilbert and where he fits?
I was not impressed with what I saw him from this year. He glommed onto tackles because he was a guy that I brought up to you several times in the beginning of the season of where's the pass rush coming from outside of Adisa Isaac, and he did not push. They needed it, and he did not push for playing time this year. So he's another guy the light has to come on for. That's the guy. To me, that's the guy. That's the guy that is 6'5", 6'6", 260, has those skills, but has yet to put the physical skills with the technical ability to get to the quarterback. And that clock is ticking too.
Let's just redo the piece and put them all in there. Let's throw them all in there. These are critical weeks for 25 different defensive players.
But the ones that you picked are actually, I think, have a legitimate chance to make those strides. And that's the important part is if one of those other guys we talked about surprises and comes out of the back of the pack to be a contributor, or let's say it's a long shot and they become great, that's a bonus. But the three guys that you highlighted absolutely have to. Like, they have to work out because Penn State needs those guys to step up. They're the next in line, and Penn State doesn't have another veteran at some of these positions.
Until the transfer portal upends everything, and everything that we're talking about right now is irrelevant on January 13th.
Well, let's get this bad boy up on the internet so that we don't miss out on having it be relevant, because that is exactly right with the transfer portal. By tomorrow, all of this could be a moot point with shifting sands in college football roster construction. You want to check it out, bluewhiteillustrated.com for Nate Bauer's full article on the three players we talked about today. Thanks for joining the Daily.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk to you tomorrow.